The air in the old school building was thick with a cold that no amount of jackets or movement could dispel. Shadows stretched and twisted along the cracked plaster walls, seeming to breathe and pulse with a life of their own. Elliot Graves stood at the center of a once grand classroom, now stripped to its bones, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Everyone, stay close. Don't let the shadows isolate you. His words, sharp and commanding, were the lifeline holding the crew together against the mounting terror. Around him, the workers flinched at every creak and whisper. The presence that had haunted them for weeks was no longer content to lurk unseen. It surged forward, manifesting in grotesque, shape-teeth-like patterns, forming where paint peeled, spectral children's faces flickering in the corners of their vision. Maya Chen moved carefully through the chaos, clutching a worn leather satchel. She paused beneath a broken window, where the moonlight filtered weakly through grime to spread out an ancient map she had found in the school's archives. The edges were frayed, the ink faded but legible enough to mark locations long buried beneath layers of plaster and brick. "This is it," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in the room. "The hidden shrine, the heart of their pain. If we can reach it, maybe we can ease the suffering that feeds this darkness." Elliot nodded, absorbing her words as he scanned the anxious faces around him. Fear was a powerful enemy, but so was despair. We move together. No one falls behind. Jared Morellis gritted his teeth, muscles taut as he gripped a crowbar like a lifeline. His usual skepticism had been shattered long ago, replaced by a fragile resolve born from countless sleepless nights and memories he wished to forget. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the shadows, a spectral figure, indistinct but hauntingly familiar. Jared froze, the weight of his PTSD crashing down with full force. The apparition shifted, taking the form of a lost comrade, a ghost from his past. For a moment Jared's breath caught, eyes wide with terror. But then, with a guttural grunt, he straightened his back and faced the figure head-on. "Not this time," he whispered fiercely, stepping forward, breaking the spell. The crew watched, galvanized by Jared's courage. Even Tommy Briggs, the young apprentice whose sensitivity to the supernatural had made him an easy target for fear, held his ground, eyes shining with a mixture of awe and determination. As they moved through the school's labyrinthine corridors, the walls seemed to pulse and shift teeth-like shapes, emerging briefly before dissolving back into cracked plaster. The air was heavy with whispered voices, some pleading, others accusing. Yet, with every step, the crew's unity grew stronger. Elliot's leadership was the anchor, Maya's knowledge the compass, and Jared's breakthrough the spark that rekindled hope. They reached a narrow passage where the faint glow of candlelight flickered from a hidden alcove. Inside lay the shrine and altar cobbled together from scattered toys, faded photographs, and brittle notes left behind by the children who had suffered here. The presence coalesced around it, a swirling mass of sorrow and rage, longing to be seen and remembered. Elliot raised his voice, steady and commanding. "We see you, we remember. We won't let you be forgotten." The shadows hesitated, the oppressive weight lifting just enough to let in a sliver of light. Maya began to chant softly, drawing on the rituals she had uncovered in the school's history, a ritual of remembrance and release. The walls trembled, teeth like shadows retreating into the darkness. The crew felt the shift, a fragile peace settling over the haunted halls. But the battle was far from over. As they regrouped, exhaustion etched deep lines on their faces. Elliot knew this victory was only a reprieve. The darkness was patient, and memory was a double-edged sword. Yet, for the first time, They had hope, fighting not just for survival, but for redemption. The corridors echoed with their footsteps, the whispered voices now a chorus of tentative calm. But somewhere deep within the walls, the presence stirred, waiting, watching, and remembering still. And Elliot, heart pounding, knew the fight was just beginning. The air in the corridor was thick and stale, the dim light from Elliot's flashlight barely penetrating the dust motes that swirled lazily in the stagnant air. He stood motionless, the worn leather of his jacket creaking softly as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The journal was open in his hands, its pages dog-eared and stained, a tangled web of his thoughts and fears laid bare in ink. His voice, low and unsteady, broke the silence as he read aloud. "I have carried this guilt for too long," he whispered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "The weight of my brother's absence, the silence I kept. The walls remember, and so do I." A shiver ran down his spine, not from the cold, but from the rawness of confession. The passage echoed off the cracked plaster, swallowed by the shadows that clung to the corners like reluctant memories. For years, Elliot had resisted looking inward, afraid that facing his own trauma would shatter the fragile control he maintained over himself and the crew. But tonight, something inside him snapped. Behind him, footsteps approached, soft, cautious. Maya's silhouette appeared in the doorway, framed by the weak beam of her lantern. "Elliot," she said gently, "we've found something. You should see this." Together, they moved down the hall to a narrow door that had previously been concealed beneath layers of peeling wallpaper and crumbling plaster. Maya's fingers traced the edges with reverence before pushing it open. The room beyond was small, suffused with the heavy scent of dust and forgotten sorrow. Faded drawings of children adorned the cracked walls, simple figures rendered in crayon, their eyes wide and haunting. Scattered about were fragile toys, brittle and worn, resting atop a makeshift altar of wooden planks. "A shrine," Maya breathed, her voice trembling. To the children, Jared and Tommy soon joined them, their faces pale but resolute. The crew gathered silently, each member feeling the weight of the room's significance pressing upon them. No words were necessary. The space spoke volumes, stories of innocence lost, of pain buried too deep to be erased. Elliot knelt by the altar, placing a candle he had carried with him onto the rough surface. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to soften the jagged outlines of the room. The oppressive atmosphere that had gripped the building for weeks began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope. "This is the heart of it," Elliot murmured, "the place where their memories live. If we can honor them here, maybe we can find peace for them and for us." Maya nodded, pulling from her bag several photographs and notes collected over their investigations. "These artifacts, this remits a testament. To remember is to resist being forgotten." Outside, the building groaned as if protesting the intrusion, walls seeming to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. Teeth like shadows retreated into the cracks, the malevolent presence weakened but not vanquished. The crew lit more candles, their flames weaving a delicate web of light that pushed back the darkness, however slightly. Jared caught Tommy's eye, a silent exchange passing between them, one of solidarity and renewed strength. The tension that had fractured the group over days of fear and suspicion eased, replaced by a shared purpose. "We can do this," Jared said quietly. Together, Elliot rose, the lines of exhaustion on his face softened by a newfound determination. "We face it head-on now. No more running from the past." The turning point had come not with a grand battle, but with the simple, profound act of facing pain and remembering. The collective presence still lingered, restless and sorrowful, but its grip had loosened. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with danger and shadows, but for the first time, Hope flickered amidst the decay. As the crew settled around the shrine, sharing stories and lighting candles, the building seemed to breathe easier. Whispers still echoed faintly, echoes of children's laughter and tears, but they no longer carried the weight of menace. Instead, they were a call to remembrance, a plea for reconciliation with the past. Elliot's journal lay open nearby, inked pages filled with confessions and revelations. He closed his eyes, letting the fragile peace wash over him, knowing the road ahead would be long and harrowing. But for now, in this small, dust-choked room, they had taken their first true step toward healing. Outside, the night deepened, shadows lengthening and twisting. The teeth in the walls retreated, but they were not gone. The house remembered on, so would the living. And somewhere in the silence, the whispered voices waited, patient and unresolved. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shattered windows of Holleridge Boarding School, its failing light struggling to penetrate the thick layers of dust and decay. Elliot Graves stood in the center of a once grand corridor, the walls around him whispering faintly, voices threading through cracks like restless ghosts trying to be heard. He pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around him, breath visible in the chill air, and glanced over at Maya Chen, who was kneeling beside a pile of crumbled bricks, carefully examining a fragment of old paper shed found among the debris. "We don't have much time," Elliot said quietly, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "The presence is getting stronger. We need to finish mapping out all possible exits and secure whatever routes we can." Maya nodded, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "The more I study these records and relics, the clearer it becomes that the building itself is a nexus for all the pain and memories trapped here. We can't just bulldoze through without respect. We have to find a way to honor them while getting out alive." A sudden crack echoed through the hallway, and Elliot's head snapped up. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the walls, twisting into fleeting shapes that resembled small, twisted figures with teeth-like patterns gnashing within the plaster. His heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe deeply and focus. Over the radio, Sheriff Paula Reed's steady voice cut through the tension. "Elliot, this is Reed. We've got teams on standby around the perimeter. I want to make sure everyone stays coordinated. No one goes off alone. Keep your crew tight." Elliot responded, "Copy that, Sheriff. We're pushing forward with securing the escape routes now." In a side room, Jared Morales grunted as he levered open a rusted door, revealing a narrow, spiraling stairwell coated in decades of dust and spiderwebs. Tommy Briggs stood close by, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip, eyes wide and alert. The faint sound of children's laughter whispered on the stale air, chilling yet distant. "This could be one of the original fire escapes," Jared muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "If it's still intact, it might be our way out." Tommy swallowed hard, casting a nervous glance around the dim space. "I don't like this place. It feels like it's watching us." Jared gave him a tight smile, though his own eyes betrayed unease. "We're all feeling it. Just keep your head down and stick close." Back in the main hall, Claire Dunham's voice rose in frustration, clashing with Elliot's calm directives. "We can't keep pushing like this. The structure is compromised. If we keep tearing into it, the whole place could collapse." Elliot met her gaze evenly. "We don't have a choice. We're running out of time, Claire. If that presence traps us here, no one will make it out alive. We have to find a balance between safety and action." Dust swirled in the shafts of dying sunlight, and the building seemed to pulse around them, groaning softly as if alive. Shapes flickered at the edges of their vision, fleeting glimpses of children's faces, twisted in sorrow and anger. The weight of history pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. As evening fell, the crew gathered near a makeshift command post set up in what used to be the school's library. Floodlights cast harsh white light over the cracked floor and broken shelves. Sheriff Reed's voice came through the radio again, coordinating efforts with emergency teams and local authorities. "We're ready to move on your signal, Elliot," she said. "Just say the word." He took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of his crew on him, some wary, some resolute, all determined. "All right," he said firmly. "We finish securing the routes tonight. No one gets left behind." The wind picked up outside, rattling the broken panes and carrying with it a chorus of whispers, half-remembered names, snatches of childhood songs, cries of pain and longing. Elliot clenched his fists, feeling the cold gnaw at his resolve. "We're not just fighting a building," he murmured. "We're fighting the memories it holds, and until they're heard, they won't let us go." A low moan echoed through the halls as the walls seemed to breathe, alive with shadows and sorrow. The race against time had begun, and failure meant being lost to the darkness forever. Elliot glanced at Maya, who was already pulling out her notes and maps, and then at Jared and Tommy, who were readying their tools. Despite the fear gnawing at their hearts, a fierce determination burned in their eyes. They would not be broken. They would not be forgotten. As night swallowed the school whole, the whispers grew louder, the shadows deeper, and the stakes higher. Every step forward was a step into the unknown, a test of courage, of will, and of the fragile bonds that held them together. And somewhere, deep within the walls, the children waited, their teeth gnashing softly against the plaster, their voices rising in a haunting chorus that promised this chapter was far from over. The air inside the hidden room felt charged, electric, with a tension that settled deep into the bones of those gathered there. Elliot Graves stood at the center, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged the scattered remnants of childhood photographs, worn toys, yellowed drawings on the cracked wooden floor. Around him, the crew formed a hesitant circle, their faces pale but determined, shadows flickering in the candlelight. The walls, rough and jagged from years of neglect and peeling paint, seemed to pulse faintly, as if the building itself were breathing, alive with memories long suppressed. Maya Chen knelt beside Elliot, her voice soft but steady as she began to read aloud from a brittle, leather-bound diary she had uncovered the day before. The words spilled into the room, recounting tales of forgotten children, their joys and their sorrows, the neglect and cruelty that had marked their short lives within these walls. Each sentence seemed to echo beyond the parchment, stirring the air until it thickened with unseen presence. Jared Morales shifted uneasily, his broad shoulders hunched but his eyes fixed on the pages. For all his usual skepticism, even he could not deny the weight of what was unfolding. The whispered voices that had tormented them for weeks crescendoed into a mournful chorus, rising and falling like waves against the stone. Tommy Briggs, younger and more sensitive, pressed his hand to his chest, his breath ragged as if struggling to hold back tears. Elliot closed his eyes, drawing a slow, steadying breath. He had spent years burying his own pain, the loss of his sibling and the fractures of his childhood hidden beneath layers of pragmatism and control. But here, in this room where the past clawed at the present, denial was no longer an option. He spoke quietly, words of remembrance and apology, of acknowledgement for the suffering that had been ignored for far too long. "We see you," he whispered. "We remember you. You are not forgotten." As the final word left his lips, the walls responded. The pulsing intensified, the cracks widening and twisting until they revealed fleeting, ghostly images. Faces of children appeared, blurred yet unmistakably full of emotion, joy, fear, longing, pain. They played in spectral light, chased shadows, and then, as if sensing their stories were finally being heard, turned solemnly towards those gathered. The presence that had once been a source of terror softened, the teeth-like shapes that had gnawed at the plaster receding back into darkness. The room grew still, bathed in a pale glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls. A soft sobbing, barely audible yet profoundly moving, filled the silence, the sound of children finally finding solace. Maya closed the diary gently. "This shrine," she said, gesturing to the arrangement of relics, "was their way of holding on to hope. We must honor it, and through that, offer peace." Jared nodded, his usual gruffness replaced by a quiet respect. Tommy wiped a tear from his cheek, courage blooming in his youthful eyes. Elliot felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the crushing guilt of his past mingling with a fragile hope that, perhaps, through acknowledgement and compassion, the cycle of pain could be broken. Yet even as the room brightened, a lingering chill hinted that the journey was far from over. The entity, while weakened, remained a testament to the scars left by neglect and loss. The crew understood that healing would demand more than ritual. It would require confronting the shadows both within the walls and within themselves. Elliot opened his eyes, meeting the gaze of his team. "This is only the beginning," he said, voice steady but filled with resolve. "But together, we can make sure these children are never forgotten again." Outside, the building seemed to breathe a little easier, the oppressive darkness retreating for a moment. Yet the faintest whisper echoed through the empty halls, a reminder that some voices never truly fade, and some scars never fully heal. The ritual had broken the cycle, but the story, the haunting, was still unfolding. And in the quiet between heartbeats, the teeth in the walls waited. The walls groaned as if the building itself was wailing in agony. Cracks raced like jagged lightning bolts across the plaster and wood, sending clouds of dust into the stale air. Elliot Graves stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, as the ceiling above him trembled ominously. The faint glow from the emergency lights barely pierced the choking haze of debris. Around him, the crew scrambled in frantic disarray. "Everyone, move. Get to the stairwell," Elliot shouted, voice hoarse but commanding. His leather jacket, tattered from days of relentless work, now dust-streaked and torn, clung to his frame as he pushed forward through the chaos. Maya Chen was close behind, clutching a worn notebook filled with hastily copied inscriptions and sketches from earlier that day. The building was collapsing. It had been a slow process at first, the creaks and groans that had become familiar, but now it was accelerating, as if some unseen force was tearing the school apart from within. Spectral shadows flickered at the edge of Elliot's vision, shifting and twisting into vague, childlike shapes. Teeth-like patterns emerged in the cracked walls, gnashing silently as the structure buckled beneath their feet. "This way," Maya called, pulling Elliot by the arm toward a narrow corridor that had remained intact for now. Her voice trembled with equal parts fear and determination. "Look at these inscriptions. They speak of pain, neglect, and a final act of remembrance. We have to understand it if we want to get out alive." Elliot nodded, his gaze flickering to the journal he carried, a battered leather-bound book that had become his lifeline. Each entry chronicled the horrors they'd uncovered, the whispered voices, the children's stories, the moments when reality bent and twisted. Now, more than ever, the journal was not just a record, it was a shield against forgetting. Behind them, a deafening crash shook the hall as a section of ceiling collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris swirling chaotically. Jared Morales shouted in pain. The unmistakable sound of a heavy beam crashing down echoed through the turmoil. Elliot spun, just in time to see Jared trapped beneath the splintered wood. "Jared, hold on!" Tommy Briggs screamed, his youthful face pale and streaked with grime. He rushed forward, desperation lending strength as he tried to lever the beam, but it wouldn't budge. Claire Dunham joined, her usual skepticism washed away by terror. Together they strained against the weight, sweat and dust coating their skin. Around them, the school seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls whispering sorrowful voices that grew louder, more insistent, as if urging them to remember. Elliot's heart clenched at the cries. The presence wasn't malevolent in the traditional sense. It was a guardian of pain, a keeper of forgotten childhood trauma, and it was awakening fully now, fueled by the chaos. "We can't leave him," Maya gasped, tears streaking down her face as she looked to Elliot. He swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic. "Keep trying. I'll find another way out." Pressing onward, Elliot's path was lit only by the flicker of failing emergency lights and the faint glow from his journal's worn Kovara beacon amid the darkness. As he moved, Maya's earlier discovery echoed in his mind. A hidden shrine deep within the school dedicated to the children who had suffered and died there. If they could reach it, perhaps they could appease the presence, calm the restless spirits. But time was running out. The building shuddered violently, beams splintering overhead. Dust and plaster rained down like a storm. Elliot's breaths came in ragged gasps as he descended deeper into the labyrinth of corridors and forgotten rooms. The walls seemed to close in, the teeth-like shapes growing larger, their silent gnashing a terrible reminder of the pain locked inside. In a small chamber, faintly illuminated by the eerie glow of Maya's lantern, Elliot found the Shriner makeshift altar adorned with faded toys, hand-carved wooden figures, and scraps of paper bearing names and dates. The air was thick with sorrow. He knelt, finger tracing the names etched into the wood. "We remember you," he whispered, voice cracking. "We won't forget." Suddenly, the room trembled again. Shadows gathered, coalescing into fleeting glimpses of children's faces, smiling, crying, begging for acknowledgement. The presence spoke not in words, but in waves of emotion, grief, longing, and a desperate hope for peace. Back in the corridors, Maya and Tommy finally freed Jared, who groaned but was alive. They rejoined Elliot, their faces pale but resolute. Together, they made their way toward the exit, guided by Sheriff Paula Reed's distant calls and the fading light of day. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the ruined school in a blood-red hue. The silhouette was stark against the darkening sky, a monument to forgotten suffering and the haunting legacy of childhood trauma. Sheriff Reed greeted them with a mix of relief and concern, her voice steady as Elliot read aloud from his journal. The words a solemn promise: "We carry their stories now. We keep them alive. The teeth in the walls may gnash, but we will not be devoured by silence." As they were led away from the crumbling building, faint whispers echoed through the cooling airsoft, lingering reminders that some memories refuse to die. The ordeal was over, but the haunting, the pain, and the need for remembrance would endure. Elliot's journal closed with a final, trembling entry, a testament not only to the terror they'd faced, but to the enduring power of memory and the courage it takes to confront the darkness within and without. The teeth in the walls had bitten deep, but the scars they left were also marks of survival.